Welcome to the Modern JavaScript Bootcamp. I'm Andrew. Thank you so much for joining in. I'm excited to show you everything that JavaScript can do. You're making a very smart choice because JavaScript is currently seeing unprecedented growth. We're seeing growth in the number of people trying to learn the language, the number of jobs available, the salary that a JavaScript developer gets, and the number of places that JavaScript can be used, from the browser to native mobile applications to the server. Now, there are a few goals for this video, a couple of things I want to knock out. I know we're all very excited to get into the course and actually learn the language and start writing and running code, but there are two things I want to cover here. The first thing I want to do is give you a brief overview of how we're going to learn JavaScript, so the curriculum. How are we going to get from where we are now to actually being able to write JavaScript applications? The other thing I want to cover are just a few quick tips and tricks for letting you get the most out of this course, getting the most out of our time together. I'm very excited to jump in, so let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to learn JavaScript. When I was designing and creating this course, I knew I wanted to create a course that was as accessible as possible. JavaScript often gets a bad reputation for being a language that's difficult to learn, but I don't see that. I don't think it needs to be that way. So in this course, we're going to build incrementally on your knowledge, starting with simple features and moving on to much more advanced features. Along the way, there will be a series of challenges requiring you to actually use what you should have learned, and that's going to make sure that by the time you get to the end of the course, you can actually go off and use JavaScript to solve real problems. You can land a job or launch your own application. The course is broken into three major parts. In part one, you're going to learn the very basics of the language. We're also going to install some stuff on your machine that we're going to need for the rest of the course. So you'll learn how to create a JavaScript file, we'll see how we can execute it, and we're going to start using JavaScript to solve interesting problems. In part one, you'll start building out the to-do and note-taking applications. In part two, we're going to take what we already know about JavaScript and connect it to the browser. So we're going to tie it up with a user interface so real people can actually use our applications. We'll be able to render stuff to the screen, like the list of notes or the to-dos that haven't been completed, and we're going to figure out how to respond to user interaction. So users can click buttons or submit forms, and we'll be able to do things with that info. This is where we're going to put the finishing touches on the to-do and note-taking applications. In part three, we're going to start working on the Hangman game as we explore asynchronous programming in JavaScript. This is going to allow us to connect our applications to third-party data sources. So we can send data off to save it, or we can request data, whether it's something like a new puzzle for the Hangman game, a list of all of the countries, a list of movies in the top 200 on IMDb. Being able to connect your application with third-party data sources is essential for creating something real-world. I am super excited to get into all of this, but I do want to continue on with part two of this video and just offer up a couple of quick tips and tricks that are going to help you get the most out of this class. If you just watch the videos in the course and you don't write code, you're going to get to the end of the course and you're not going to know how JavaScript works, and you won't be able to use it to land a job or build an application. And that's not my goal for you. I want you to learn and understand JavaScript, and to do that, you need experience actually writing code and solving problems. So as we explore a new language feature, I'm going to write some code that shows that feature off. We'll talk about the feature and we'll see how it works. It's your job to also write the code and run it when I do. Throughout the course, there are also 80 some odd challenges. This is where I give you a little problem to solve. I then tell you to pause the video and you go off and solve that problem. When you're done, you come back and we work through the solution together. It's essential to actually work through these as well. That's going to give you real hands-on experience solving problems with JavaScript. So when you're done the course and you want to create your own application, you'll actually be able to do that because you'll have real-world experience solving problems on your very own. I would never give you a challenge that covered something we didn't talk about in the course, and the entire course is filmed in real time. It's paced in a way where you can actually follow along. The last piece of advice I have for you is to take your time working through the course. Learning is not a race. It would be very easy to blow through this course in 4 days. I simply stop following along and I skip all the challenges. I watch the videos all day and I'm done in 4 days. The only problem is that when I'm done, I haven't actually learned anything. That's not my wish for you. For you, it's going to take a bit more time, and that's okay. I recommend coming up with a schedule that works for you. Maybe you can dedicate weekday evenings to the course, or maybe you can dedicate Saturdays and Sunday mornings to learning JavaScript. Whatever it happens to be, try to find a schedule and stick to it. It is truly the slow but steady that are going to win. Now, there are other situations where you might want to think about your pacing as well. If you get really tired and you find yourself skipping challenges or not following along, it's probably a good idea to take a break. Maybe take a day or two off. Go ahead and step outside or do something else for a little while. Then when you come back, you'll be recharged and ready to actually learn the language. It's not a race. By the end, my goal for you is to actually learn and understand JavaScript. That might take 3 weeks or 2 months. Either way is good. Let's go ahead and continue on in the next video. Hello and welcome to Section 2. While 99% of this course is you looking at my screen, the first video for each section is a little section introduction, where we meet up face-to-face and talk about what we're going to cover in the section. These are super quick, just about a minute total. So here's an example. In this section, you're going to be setting up your machine for the rest of the course. In order to actually write JavaScript code and use the language effectively, there are a few tools we have to install. The good news is that these tools are free and they're available for all operating systems, so you can work through this course on Windows, Linux, or Mac. Any operating system is fine. These tools are going to be essential for actually continuing on with the rest of the course, and by the end of this section, you are going to have written and run your very first simple JavaScript app. So let's go ahead and jump right in. In this video, you're going to install Visual Studio Code on your machine. Visual Studio Code is a text editor. It's not like the text editor on your machine you might use to jot down a few notes. This is one specifically designed for programming languages. So it's going to make it really easy to actually write JavaScript code. This is where we're going to write all the code we write throughout the course. We can learn a bit more about this one, Visual Studio Code, by going to code.visualstudio.com. Aside from being my favorite text editor, Visual Studio Code is free, open source, and it runs everywhere. So regardless of what operating system you're using for this course, you are going to be able to install VSC and configure it exactly as I have my local copy set up. For this course, I've actually completely uninstalled all of my plugins, themes, and settings. I deleted Visual Studio Code completely, and we're going to go through the process of setting things up from scratch. We'll start off just by using the default features. VSC comes with JavaScript support, and as we move through the course, we'll add on and customize Visual Studio Code, creating a better development environment. So if you don't have a text editor you already use, or you haven't used VSC before, I'd recommend giving it a try throughout this course, as you'll get the added benefit of being able to set up your local development environment exactly as I have my local development environment set up. If you don't want to use VSC, there are other options out there. In the past, I used Atom. This was a text editor released by GitHub. You could also use Sublime Text, which was a very popular choice in the past. And lastly, there are more complex editors like WebStorm. WebStorm isn't free, but it does come with a heck of a lot of features. It's more of an IDE than a text editor. But for this course, we don't need a lot of those features. I prefer Visual Studio Code. So let's go ahead and actually kick things off by downloading the build. We're going to run through the process of just installing it real quick. Once we're done, we're going to crack it open and make sure it was actually installed successfully. This is where we're going to write all of the code throughout the course, so I'm going to be keeping this program open from basically right now until the final video. Let's go ahead and crack that one open, and the process is going to be a little different for each operating system. I'm going to assume that you are used to installing things, so hopefully you can get through that process without too much trouble. Up here, I have my downloads window. I was just given the application to drag to my applications directory on a Mac. I'm going to do just that. And then all we're going to do is crack it open and make sure it actually works. I'll go into Applications, down to Visual Studio Code. I'm going to open that one up. And the first time you open it, you might need to accept some permissions or change some stuff. Mac typically does require some sort of confirmation, like this window right here. And once we click open in that window, we should actually get brought into the program. Right here, what are we seeing? We're seeing the welcome screen for Visual Studio Code. This welcome screen is just trying to guide you through some ways to get started or ways you can customize the program. And we are going to do a little customization right now. What we're going to do is install a couple of plugins that are going to make life a whole lot easier. The first thing we can do is just uncheck this box. We don't need to see this welcome screen every single time we open it up. Over here, this little package icon, this is where we can install new plugins. All of these plugins are going to customize the behavior of VSC in some way. The first one we're going to grab is called Sublime Text Key Map. This plugin is going to switch the keyboard shortcuts for Visual Studio Code from their defaults to the defaults popularized by Sublime Text. While I don't like the Sublime Text editor, I do think they really nailed it with the keyboard shortcuts. This is a super popular plugin. We got about 500,000 downloads. So we're going to go ahead and click install to install this one. Now, in order to actually have this plugin take effect, we have to reload things, but we're going to install one more plugin before we do that. This course is going to be using modern JavaScript from the beginning. And in order to support some of those features, there's just one plugin we have to install. To find this, we're going to search for ES6. We'll talk more about exactly what ES6 is later. For now, the plugin we're looking for is called Babel ES6/ES7, and these are just version numbers, so we're supporting more recent versions of the syntax. This is going to make sure that as we use those new modern features, we're actually able to have a text editor that supports them. Now we can just click install for this one as well, and those are the only two we're going to be using for the moment. For now, we can go ahead and click reload. This is going to completely reload Visual Studio Code, making sure those plugins are actually used. And now it's time to go ahead and move on. Up above, new features are available for Sublime Text Key Map 3. Do you want to enable? Sure. Let's go ahead and do just that. All right, so we have Visual Studio Code all set up. We can go ahead and close down that welcome screen. At this point, it's asking us to open up a new folder for our project. We will do that just a bit later in this section. What we're going to do in the next video is install a program that's actually going to allow us to run JavaScript. We have a place to write JavaScript. Now we need a place to run it. Let's go ahead and jump right into that. As I mentioned in the introduction to the course, one of the great things about JavaScript is that it's a universal language. So once you know it, you can use it in a lot of different places. I can use JavaScript in the browser, on a server. I can use it to make a mobile application, or I can program a virtual reality headset. Whatever you want to do, you can probably do with JavaScript. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that we need to install at least one of those. We need a way to execute JavaScript code. And to do that for now, we're going to be using Node.js. Node.js is typically used to execute JavaScript to create a server, to create a backend for a mobile app or a website. That's not what we're going to use it for. We are just going to use Node to execute basic JavaScript scripts. We're not going to be exploring any Node-specific features. Don't worry, we are going to tie our JavaScript files into the browser a bit later in the course, but that's a more complex process, which requires us to set up HTML, a web server, and a few other things. For now, as we're just trying to learn the basics, that would be a distraction. So we're going to stick with Node as a really easy way to run JavaScript from our computer. We can find that at nodejs.org. Here we can grab the installer, and once again, Node is available for all operating systems. It's free and open source, so regardless of what machine you're using to watch this course, you're going to be able to set it up just like I do. The particular version of Node we install really isn't important because we're not going to be using Node-specific features in this course. We're just using this as a way to run JavaScript files. So as long as we grab version 8 or greater, we're going to be good to go. That means V8, V9, 10, 11, or 12. Right here, I do have a V9 release. I'm going to go ahead and just install this one. Now, the process for installing Node is super simple. It's one of those click next installers. So all we have to do is confirm that we've actually read the terms of service. We have to pick the place to install it. I'm just going to use the default for everything. Then we authenticate, and in about 10 seconds, we'll have Node installed. So we have Visual Studio Code, that is a way to write JavaScript code. We have Node, which is a way to run JavaScript code, which means that we're all set up. These are the only two things we need to install to get a basic development environment configured. I'm going to move the Node installer to the trash, and for now, we're all done. What we're going to do in the next video is to explore a program on your machine called the terminal. It's something that we're going to need to use in order to actually run the files we create. So we're going to mess around with that in the next couple of videos. I'm real excited to get to this stuff. We're actually going to start learning, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Welcome back. This video is for Windows users only. If you're on Windows, there is one more thing you have to install. If you're on a Mac or Linux-based machine, you can go ahead and skip this one and move on to the next one. There's nothing for you here. All right, if you're still watching, I am going to assume that you are on Windows, and what I'm going to do is switch over to a virtual machine. I know this might not be the clearest resolution. I'm only going to be using the virtual machine in this one video. What you need to install is a program called Commander, and you can find that at cmder.net. Commander is a terminal emulator for Windows. So in the next video, we're actually going to explore the terminal and we're going to run some commands from it. If you're on Mac or Linux, you're going to have access to the same set of commands. If you're on Windows, there's a slightly different set of commands. But with a program like Commander, you can actually use the same standardized commands right on your Windows machine. This is a super popular program. It's also similar to Git Bash, which tries to do the exact same thing. All you need to do, though, is install it. In the next video, we'll explore it. So down below, there are two types of installers. There's the mini installer and the full installer. You want to grab the full installation. All this is going to do is download a zip. I have the zip already downloaded and extracted since this virtual machine is really slow. But once you do open up that Commander directory, you're going to have the Commander application. All you have to do is double click it. It's going to crack open a new window that looks just like this. And while it might take a few seconds to start the first time around, in the future it should start pretty quickly. So whenever I open up the terminal on my Mac, like I'm going to do in the next video, you're just going to open up Commander instead. You'll be able to follow along and run the exact same commands. So make sure you do have this program set up. Do take a moment to try to crack it open and make sure you see something like this. Obviously the details will be a little different, but you should see a black screen where it's asking you to type something in. If you do see this, then you're ready to move on to the next video where we're going to explore some commands we can actually use right inside of here. So stay tuned and I'll see you next time. Welcome back. In this video, we're all moving together regardless of our operating system, and that's the way we're going to move on throughout the rest of the course. There is no more OS specific videos. In this one, you're going to learn about the terminal. The terminal is a program on your machine, and it allows you to type commands and issue those commands to the computer. These commands can do all sorts of things. We're going to be using the terminal in the beginning of this course to issue commands to execute the JavaScript files we write. So if we write a JavaScript file that takes two numbers and adds them together, we can issue the command to execute that file and see the result. So that's why this is important. This is how we're actually going to be able to execute the code we run. Let's go ahead and start by cracking this open. Now, if you're already familiar with the terminal, if you're used to using commands like cd to change directories, ls and pwd, you can go ahead and skip this one. There's no new information for you. You can move right over to the next one where we start creating and running our first JavaScript file. If you're not familiar with those commands or you just want a quick refresher, do go ahead and continue on with this one as the information is going to be pretty important. We're going to be using the terminal a lot throughout the entire course. Let's go ahead and crack this open. On a Mac, we're looking for the terminal. On Windows, you're going to use Commander installed in the last video. And if you're on Linux, you're going to use the terminal, the command line, or the command prompt, depending on your distribution. Regardless of what it's called, in the end of the day, it's all the same thing. It is a place to type out commands. We then run the command and we view the output. So let's go ahead and kick things off by issuing our very first command. This one is going to print the version of Node installed on our computers. And that's going to allow us to confirm it was actually installed successfully. So let's go ahead and run this. It is node space -v. This is going to run Node and ask for the version that it's using. Now, how do we run a command once we type it out? Well, we just hit enter. So we hit enter. It issues the command to the computer. The computer does some sort of work depending on what the command does, and then we get an output. Right here, what are we getting? We're getting version 9.3.0, which is indeed correct for me. Your version might look slightly different. As long as the first number is an 8 or greater, you are good to go. So this is just one command we can issue from the command line. Now, your command might have failed if Node didn't install correctly. I can simulate that by just running this command with a typo. Instead of running Node, I'm going to run Node with two E's. I then use space -v like I did above. This command is going to fail, and we're getting some output. Command not found. So if you're seeing something like command not found for the correct command without the typo, that means that Node wasn't successfully installed on your machine, and you're going to want to fix that before moving forward. You can open up a new question in the Q&A, and I'll help you get unstuck. If you are seeing Node's version though, we are ready to continue on and learn about another command. This one is super easy. It's called clear. All clear does is it clears the output shown on the screen. So if we run a bunch of commands and we have a whole bunch of output, we might want to get back to a nice clean slate. If I type clear and hit enter, what happens? We have a new command prompt showing up above, and none of the previous commands or their output are visible. Now we can issue other commands. And what I want to talk about is how the commands are actually executed. Every command we run from the terminal runs from a specific directory on our machine. So to visualize this, what we're going to do is crack open the Finder or the File Explorer. In the Finder, I'm always looking at a specific directory. In this case, it's the desktop. In this case, it's my user folder. In this case, it's my downloads directory. So we're always looking at the contents of a specific directory. Well, this is kind of similar in the terminal. In the terminal, the commands we run are always running from a specific directory. And if we don't pick one, it uses our user directory by default. And we can prove this. We can run pwd, which stands for print working directory. And the working directory is just the directory you're currently issuing commands from. We'll talk about how we can switch directories in a little bit. Right here though, if we run pwd, what do we get? We get /users/Andrew. So right here, that directory lines up with this folder. We're viewing the contents of the folder in the Finder. We're able to execute commands from the directory over here in the terminal. Now let's say we do want to execute commands from a different folder. In the Finder, if I wanted to view the contents of a different folder, I would just click the folder, like desktop. I can switch to see what's in there. I could click a different folder to see what's in there. The same thing is true with the terminal. We can use a command to switch the directory we're currently executing commands from. So let's go ahead and switch from the user directory, which I'm currently in over here, to the desktop folder. How do we do that? We use the cd command. CD is short for change directory, and it allows us to switch the folder we're executing commands from. And this is important because when we run our scripts, we're going to have to issue the command from the location where those scripts are stored. We'll talk about that in the next video when we actually set up a folder to store all of the files you're going to be writing in this class. Right here, though, we can switch to the desktop by using cd space followed by the folder we want to switch into. Right here, desktop. Now, if I run that command, what do we get? Well, we get no new output, but if we run pwd again, we can see the working directory has changed. I see users Andrew where I was before, and then desktop. Now we can also go up a directory. So let's say I want to go back to the user folder. To do that, I use cd space ... That goes from the current directory up to the parent directory, which would be switching from desktop back to Andrew. I run cd ... I then run pwd, and what do I get right here? I'm right back where I started from. I'm executing commands once again from the user folder. The last command I want to talk about is ls. ls lists out the contents of the current working directory, so it's similar to how we can see the contents of a folder in the Finder. If I run ls, we can see all of the stuff inside of that folder. Right here, I'm seeing all of the contents of the Andrew directory, which is exactly what I'm seeing over here. I could switch directories to view the contents of a different folder. I could use cd desktop to go back to the desktop. I could use ls, and what do I get? I get the one thing on my desktop, which is a directory called old. So throughout the course, we're going to be using clear to clear the terminal output. We're going to be using pwd to figure out where we're executing commands from. We're going to be using cd to change the location we're executing commands from, and sometimes we'll be using ls to figure out what's inside of the current folder. This is a good time to remind you that there is a PDF companion for this course. It contains information for each and every lecture where we learn something new. For this lecture, it actually lists out all of the commands we just talked about. It tells you exactly what they do and how you can use them. So if you ever forget exactly how things work down the line, you don't have to watch a full video to find the right part. You can usually just refer to that PDF, get the information you need quickly, and then get back to doing whatever you were doing. That's where we're going to stop for this one. We know the the very basics of the terminal, but it might not be clear why these are important. We're going to figure out why they're important in the very next video where we create and run our very first JavaScript script. I am really excited to get to that. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. Welcome to the last video for this section. We spent the entire section setting up our computer for the rest of the course. We installed a bunch of tools and configured them, creating a good environment for writing and running JavaScript. So what are we going to do in this one? Well, we're going to test that everything is working by writing and running some JavaScript. To kick things off, what I want to do is create a directory where we can store all of the stuff we create in this course. I'm going to create one on the desktop of my computer, but if you already have a place you store your code, you're more than welcome to put it there. I'm going to put mine right on the desktop, and I'm going to call it JS Boot Camp. And we're going to be putting up a whole bunch of stuff inside of here throughout the course. For now, what we're going to do is create a new folder called Basics. And the basics directory is where we're going to start exploring the basics. So we're going to figure out how the fundamental features of the language works. And in the next section, we'll be adding about a dozen different files inside of here. For now, though, we can go ahead and crack open this folder in both the terminal and Visual Studio Code. We'll add a little bit of code in and we'll run the script. First up, let's navigate to it inside of the terminal. Now I put mine on the desktop and I'm currently inside of the desktop. I can prove that by running pwd. I get users Andrew desktop. If I want to switch over to the basics folder, I use cd to go into JS Bootcamp. Then I use cd again to go into the basics directory. You can actually also chain that command together. So I can go back to directories by not using cd ... but cd ... /.. This is going to bring me up to folders, and I can use cd to navigate into both using one command too. So I'm back on the desktop, cd space JS Bootcamp / basics. Excellent. So I'm in the basics folder inside of the terminal. Let's go ahead and move over to Visual Studio Code. Over here, we're going to go ahead and open up a new directory that's sitting on the desktop inside of JS Bootcamp. We want to open the basics folder. I'm going to crack that open. And now what we're going to see is a view similar to what we'll have for the rest of the course. We have our files and folders over here, and we have the individual contents of the file right here. We don't have any files, so let's go ahead and create our first one. Inside of the basics folder, I'm going to click this icon to add a brand new file, and we're going to call this one hello world.js. All we're going to do is create a one-liner to print out a little message to whoever runs the script. We're not going to talk about the syntax, the characters that make up this line. We're just going to type these characters blindly to test that the environment is indeed working. So for the moment, you're going to follow along with about the next 12 characters. We're going to start off with the word console, which we'll be talking about later in the course. Then we're going to add a dot, the period character, followed by the word log. Now you can see that we're starting to get some syntax highlighting from Visual Studio Code. This is going to break up our code and make it way more readable. And we'll explore more of that in the next section when we actually learn about JavaScript. For now, we're just going to type blindly and ignore why console is green and log is yellow. From here, we're going to open a parenthesis. So that's going to be Shift 9. And you can see that it's automatically closed for us. Inside of here, we're going to open up a single quote. This is also automatically closed for us. And all we're going to do is type hello world. Now we don't know what this program does. I don't know why there's parentheses, why there's quotes, why there's dots. That's okay. All we want to do is get this stuff typed in the file. We want to save the file, then we want to execute it. We're going to execute it by running a single command from the terminal. Let's kick things off by clearing the terminal with clear. To run the JavaScript file, we're going to be using the node command. It is node space followed by the file name. In this case, that would be hello-world.js. Now, when I hit enter, it's actually going to go off, grab the contents of this script. It is going to run them, and we're going to see the output of the file. If I run the program, What do we get? We get hello world printing as the message for our program. Is this the most useful program in the world? No, but it does at least prove that our environment is all set up so we can work towards actually figuring out what stuff like this does. Now we can go ahead and change this real quick. If I change world over to my first name, Andrew, and toss an exclamation mark at the end, we can save the file and rerun it to see that print instead. Over here, node space, hello-world.js, and what do we get? We get hello Andrew printing to the screen. So throughout the course, we're going to be creating JavaScript files over in Visual Studio Code, and we're going to be executing them over in the terminal. Later on in the course, we'll be executing them in the browser, but this is the setup that we're going to start with. Now it's time to start figuring out exactly what these characters mean, what they do, and how we can use them to do something meaningful. That's all coming up in the next section where we dive into JavaScript basics. I am really excited to get to that, so let's go ahead and jump into it.